Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to have you all here today. My name is Jamie Adasi. For those who I haven't met yet, I am the head of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Allyship, or what we call IDEA at Greenhouse Software. And today, as you can see, we're talking about being inclusive from the start, in particular, how we can integrate hiring into that plan. And so before I get into it, you can hit the next slide myself. One thing I want to say is my wonderful colleague, Mita Mallick, she meant to be here with us today, but unfortunately her flights were canceled, delayed this morning. She did not make it in. I almost didn't make it in from DC last night. But again, just know Mita is here in essence, and we'll be talking a little bit about her book, Reimagine Inclusion, as we get into this. But something I want to say about myself, yes, I'm the head of IDEA at Greenhouse. I'm also a wife, a sister, a granddaughter, auntie of 7, all under 11, a future mom. I want to be a mom in the future. And what else would I say? And I feel my most authentic, you all, when I'm eating with my hands. I don't know about you all, but I grew up in a Nigerian American home where literally you'd have a nice hot bowl of water to clean your hands, and then you'd have food. And so for me, if you ever want to see me at my most kind of relaxed state, it's when we're eating food with our hands. But let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, we cannot talk about DEIB in today's world without talking about the current climate, what's happening in the world. So want to start us off with just some quick facts to get us all on the same page. You all are not surprised by any of this. Recent DEI headlines, from Roe versus Wade being overturned last year to this year with affirmative action being overturned. You all can see the different things here. LGBTQ plus folks being attacked globally. Bans on all types of books. We're going through a lot in the DEI field, so if you want to send some extra love out there to all of us doing this work, we are receiving it. But even with all of that, interesting enough, a majority of US workers still say that DEI is critical for them in their workplace. They feel like it's really important. But we're seeing a smaller share of folks actually committing to that work in their actual workplaces. So there's still a bunch of work to do. I want to get into this with you all, kind of the hiring good, bad, and ugly of hiring practices. We'll start with the good. Actually, we'll start with the bad first and pivot to some of the good stuff. And first, I'll start with a study that Greenhouse did this year. We actually studied about 1,200 candidates across Greenhouse, folks who use Greenhouse software to get a job. And unfortunately, what we're seeing here, no one's going to be surprised, about 3/4 of underrepresented candidates, those are folks who identify as Arab, Asian, Black, Hispanic, Latino, of multicultural, multiracial backgrounds, have talked about being ghosted after an interview. You all can probably think back to interview experiences that you've had personally, and maybe you have been ghosted yourself, but I think the thing that's really surprising here is how different that is from white folks going through the same process, right, being ghosted. It's still bad. Over 60% of employers are ghosting candidates, which I think goes back to things around, of course, bandwidth, making sure that you actually know how to run a structured hiring process, et cetera. But that really leaves a bad taste in candidates' mouth. And right now, yes, employers, we have the power when it comes to hiring right now, but that will shift over time, and so really being prepared for that shift is critical as we look at this data. Okay, let's keep going. And one thing I wanted to ask Mita about, but she's not here, but we'll talk about it still, is this idea of meritocracy versus mirrorocracy. So again, thinking about hiring, thinking about things that we can be working on, doing better. Mita has this book, Reimagine Inclusion. It's debunking 13 myths to transform your workplace. It's actually coming out in October, and if you come by our Greenhouse booth, you can sign up to get a copy for the first 100 people, so definitely do that. Myth number 4 for Mita, though, she talks about hiring and developing diverse talent. As long as they're good, you may have heard this before, right? It's almost this like zero-sum game that we like to fall into in the business world, which means, we only have a certain type of person or people who will do well in the role. It's all about the culture fit. You all know these things. But why I wanted to bring up meritocracy versus mirrorocracy, Mita in particular talks about how a lot of organizations, unfortunately, are taking on habits around mirrorocracy. And what does that mean? It's exactly what you think it means. It's that the people on my team kind of mirror my same values, mirror my same background, maybe mirror my same experience or school or college. And so how can we move employers away from meritocracy as we think about good hiring practices. We'll talk about that in a second. Before I get to this greenhouse case study, one thing I wanted to talk about were some of the good things. We've gone through some of the harder stuff already, but what are some of the good things? First of all, if you are hiring and that work is connected back to what I like to call workforce representation goals in some way, you're already on the right track. If right now you have an opening at your company and you really want to get some diverse candidates, a diverse slate, but you have no actual goals as to how to do that, nothing is going to move, right? I think a lot of people wish to become more diverse without actually putting those numbers in place. Like, what does that actually look like at our company? What does diversity mean at our company? Having those conversations with your leadership at the top is critical, but also involving your experts, your folks who are individual contributors, to help you understand what does diversity mean here? Where are we operating within the nation here in the US or abroad globally? So diversity will look very different depending on where you are. And at Greenhouse, that's very true. We have workforce diversity goals that are specific to North America versus specific to EMEA, and we do focus on different groups depending on where we are. So what's number one thing I would say is good in hiring is if you actually have goals that you have benchmarked and are moving towards, not just trying to become diverse out of nowhere. Additionally, if you all have diverse hiring teams and diverse interview teams, that also helps. You might say, hey, I'm on a team that's mostly, let's say, white women, and we want to become more diverse. What do we do? Does your company have employee resource groups that you can tap into and have them kind of do informational interviews along the way? Is that a possibility? Or if you don't have an ERG that's focused on different communities, et cetera, what are you doing today internally to help make sure that there are policies in place, that there are practices in place that help make sure that the environment is inclusive? That's going to be critical as you're thinking about just hiring more diverse candidates. You have to make sure that the place that they're coming into is actually one that people want to be received in. Additionally, you all know about diverse hiring slates. I'm going to get into that in a second with the Greenhouse case study that you're seeing here. And then, of course, at Greenhouse, we talk about structured hiring is everything. So, I think about being inclusive from the start. Even when I think about things like performance reviews, I think about, for our arbors and second, our ERGs, how they're doing. If there's no structure attached to these things, you're just having extra work being done without actual output, right? You need to be able to track these things. And before I get to that greenhouse, I'm going to come back to the case study. The role of ERGs. I think many people kind of see ERGs as like they can do it all, okay? They're going to come in, they're going to hire for us, they're going to change the world, which is wonderful, but that's not really the case. And many times, ERGs are not getting paid to do this extra work. It's just really, for many folks, an extracurricular. But at Greenhouse, we actually have reimagined our ERGs. We now call them arbors, and as you see here, we define arbors as trees that purify their environment by producing oxygen. And in the same way, our greenhouse arbors help to infuse our organization with idea, creating optimal conditions for everyone to grow. Not only that, they actually have business imperatives and objectives that they actually work towards. And so you'll see here, there are three main areas that our arbors support us in. That's community building across our different groups. That's actually supporting a greenhouse business initiative, so there are KPIs actually attached to these leadership positions. And then, of course, promoting Greenhouse as a place where idea happens. And so in the hiring realm of things, yes, our arbor leaders do help us when it comes to referrals, leadership referrals, and general talent making. At Greenhouse, we believe that everybody is a talent maker, whether you are a hiring manager or not. And so all of our arbors are trained in what we call talent making as well. So there's different ways that they're incorporated or included. One thing here that we do different than a lot of companies, I think we're amongst 5% of companies across all different industries who offer something in return for ERG membership. So we actually offer equity at Greenhouse. Other companies do equity, some do equity in cash bonuses, but we try to make sure that there's actually some type of paid stipend in there because this is extra work on top of people's jobs. And as you see here, we also do professional development opportunities, mentorship, company-wide visibility. There's a lot of ways that ERGs are plugged in and that we make sure our ERG leaders are growing at Greenhouse. So you can rely on ERG leaders when it comes to hiring, but I would say they shouldn't be your only strategy. Okay, coming back, I want to talk about that quick case study. And then I'll see if we have time for questions here. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about was this case study here around Greenhouse. If you're wondering, what am I talking about? When I got to Greenhouse, I got to Greenhouse March of 2020, actually the first week of the global pandemic shutdown. I moved to New York, and within a couple of days, I was working from home. So definitely a big culture shock for me. But when I got there, we were really struggling when it came to our inbound applicants. Over 70% of our inbound applicants identified as white. So we knew that was an issue. This is across all levels. We're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? Because at that time, about 95% of our executive leadership team was white as well. So I'm coming in, we have a lot of stuff to handle. And one of the things that our TP&A team, our talent planning and acquisition team, or known elsewhere as TA or recruiting, one thing that they did was work with me early on to figure out how can we start to diversify our candidate slates, right? We're relying heavily on inbound applicants. It's not working clearly. What do we do? And so actually over the course of a couple of years, tying this work back to our DEI idea strategy, we were actually able to increase what we call proactive sourcing. So relying less on inbound applications and moving more towards proactively sourcing diverse candidates. What does that look like? For a leadership position, we would likely not even post it online at first. What we're doing, instead of posting it online, we have it posted internally on Greenhouse, taking about 2 to 3 weeks to actually actively recruit folks from diverse backgrounds, whether that's via LinkedIn, via Black Professionals in Tech Network. There's a lot of different places that we would link ourselves into for this work. And we were actually happy to see that right now, our diversity for our executive team now has shifted. Like I said, 95% were white when I first got to Greenhouse in 2020. We're at about 50% now people of color on our executive leadership team. This also, if you think about our board too, our board has become more diverse. And so we think that this starts from the top down. Yes, you can focus on making sure your individual contributors are more diverse, people in entry-level positions are more diverse, but often if I don't see myself in leadership, it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna be around long enough anyways to get to that space. And so we're actually kind of working from the opposite, setting goals, like I said, from the top, making sure that our top line leaders are as diverse as possible so that trickles down into the rest of the community. So I'm very happy to see that progress in the last 3 years. It's been a struggle, but we have made it, and it's been a lot of teamwork as well along the way. Now, before I continue, I've been talking at you all for 15 minutes straight. I love audience interaction. Do y'all have questions right now when you think about hiring, being more inclusive, things that you're struggling with on your team today, things that colleagues have struggled with that they've talked to you about or you've heard today? I would love to give you all a little bit of time for Q&A before we wrap up. Any thoughts, questions on the content that's been presented so far? And I'll give you all a second. Yes, in the back. And please stand up and say your name. Where are you coming from? Yes. Excellent question. I love that. That was a great question. So the question was with self-identification, how do you actually enable self-ID to happen within the hiring process? How do you pass that information along to the hiring team, et cetera? Excellent question. So if you're using Greenhouse, you know that you can actually customize your demographic questions to be able to collect self-ID info. At Greenhouse, we've done a really good job about, we will collect self-ID, but it's not attached to a specific candidate, right? So what's happening is that we are giving folks literally it's optional to actually self-ID on the front end. And depending on the country you're operating in, this changes. For example, in Canada, we cannot ask self-ID questions in Canada, but we can, after someone has gone through a process, because it's part of our self-ID internal program, ask folks to self-ID then, right? So there's ways to do it to get around some of the legalities of it. But I would say one is upfront. Like if you can, when someone is literally applying, having that be a space where you're collecting, whether it's just race, gender, it can be a disability status, a couple of key kind of diversity characteristics early on, and then you aggregate that data. You don't tie that data back to a single candidate. You aggregate that, and then you share that back with the hiring team. So at Greenhouse, we actually have team representation dashboards for our hiring managers. So we basically talk about, here's your team today, here's the makeup of gender, here's the makeup of whatever we've collected at that time. We collect sexual orientation, gender, race, ethnicity, nationality. We collect a bunch of stuff so we can share that with our hiring managers and say, What are you missing on your team? Kind of who are you missing on your team? What are the skills that you're missing? Tying back kind of diversity characteristics to skills, I think is also critical. It's not just saying we're trying to get a diverse hire, which I think happens too often, but saying what are the skills that our team is missing from a strengths-based perspective? Who can we bring in who could be helping us with that, whether that's being more resilient, more agile during these kind of tougher economic times, whatever you might say the thing is. But I would say looking at that, being able to parse the data out, make sure it's anonymous so that no one feels like they're being targeted during a process. That's the best way that we do it, and we do a lot of updates with our hiring managers along the way so they can see literally weekly, here's who's applied, here's a demographic breakdown of the candidates who's applied, here's who's advancing, who's not, so we can start to identify are there any biases creeping up, things that are holding us back from maybe moving forward a black candidate versus maybe a white candidate, as an example. That's a great question, though. Other thoughts, other questions? We have a couple minutes here before I wrap up. Yes, back here. Please stand up and say your name, and you can speak as loudly as you can. Great. Yes. Good question. Yep. Yep. So just let me hear, so I'm clear that I got the question. It was how do you balance kind of the multi-generational workforce we have today with some of the maybe old guard that kind of is there to say this is how things are going to be and we're not changing anything? That's kind of what I'm hearing overall. That's a great question. First of all, we have to acknowledge that we have 5 generations right now in the workforce, operating, living their best lives, interacting with each other, et cetera. Some of my best friends, mentors, are folks in their 70s, 80s. Why? Because I've exposed myself to people who are different ages than me. So I often will try to come from the perspective, I'm working with a leader in particular who's like, I don't want to change. Actually, I'll give you all the real life example. Yesterday, I was at a doctor's appointment. My doctor told him what I do. He's asking what I do. I do diversity work for a software company. And he was like, oh, I'm so tired of having these pronouns. I have to take this test to do this pronouns thing. I don't know why I have to say pronouns. And I'm sitting here going, does this man know what I do? Like I just said, but I was calm, really listened to him. He's probably in his maybe 60s. So I really try to, in my mind, go, okay, Jamie, you're talking to somebody who has learned a lot in their lives, doesn't have a lot of time to learn new things. And his whole thing was, why is it relevant to how he's providing care today? So for me, it was all about, look, if you're trying to treat, and he actually is a doctor for Team USA, I'm like, if you're trying to treat folks who are from different backgrounds, you may have someone who comes into you who is transgender. He's like, I have to learn about transgender people too. I'm like, yes, you do, because at this stage, there are folks who identify that way, and that's a big part of how they feel cared for. And as a doctor, if that's really important to you, someone feeling cared for, then you should actually take into consideration that, yeah, I do have to learn something more additional. Additionally, for me, I often take it from the lifelong learner perspective, meaning that there's a lot that I want to always learn, and so I try to approach it that way with different leaders as well. There's more to learn, there's more business to attain, there's more money to make. If we're just being really basically straightforward here and you don't care about the social impact, the business impact is that there's more regions you can be working out of, more systems, more ecosystems you can be a part of when you broaden your perspective. I can think more innovatively if I have a team member here who doesn't think like me. So trying to help break that part down, I feel like has been really important, while at the same time really encouraging our newer folks coming into the workforce to speak up. Don't be ashamed or feel disempowered if just one conversation doesn't go your way. Like this is going to be it could be a battle, but it's a back and forth, and this is how we move forward in organizations. So it's not an easy answer, and it depends on the person and the leaders you're working with, but I try to be as patient as possible so that I am exhibiting what I would want from a leader if I was being asked to do diversity work. I have to end, you all. That was a quick 20 minutes. And again, we missed out on Mita, but if you would like, stop by the greenhouse table because, like I said, we have a free copy of Mita's book, Reimagine Inclusion. It's debunking 13 myths of DEI. And for the first 100 people who sign up at our table, you will get that shipped to you in October. And also check out our LinkedIn Live that we did with Mita. If you want some more of her content, you can just go on our LinkedIn page and find that conversation with Mita. But thank you all for your time today. And if you have questions, I'll be here around.